Good afternoon.
Right.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bob Silverman. I will be your host today for this episode of the Uncut Thread, a weekly YouTube series, live YouTube series brought to you by Quilt Africa Fabrics. And each week we will have a different topic and different guests, and we'll be discussing topics having to do with the quilting industry, guilds, styles, all of the above. All of the ones previous to this one have been recorded. So if you want to catch up on any, you can go to YouTube, go to Quilt Africa Fabrics, and they'll come up and you can scan through the different series and see which ones that would interest you that you want to watch. So today, my guest is Juanita Armbruster. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And
Yes.
be discussing traditional versus modern quilts and all of that entails. But before we get started, I will tell you a little about myself and my quilting background, and then I will invite Juanita to introduce herself and tell you how she got involved in quilting and kind of her backstory a little bit. So mine is I started quilting about 30 years ago. I grew up in apartment buildings in New York City. And when I moved to the country, the first time I had lived in a house, I thought, well, why not make a quilt? We had some family quilts and just kind of naively thought, how hard could that be? So I started quilting. My first quilt was all by hand. My second quilt was all by machine. And then I got hooked and started looking for quilt shops in my area to shop in. And there weren't any, so I opened one. So my partner and I had a quilt shop in Woodstock, New York for I think about 10 years. And then fast forward to us moving to Alabama 14 years ago, and I managed a quilt shop for almost another 10 years. So I have about 20 years in as an industry person and 30 years as just an individual hobbyist quilter. I'm into all styles. I love working with the African fabrics. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of it. I'm kind of into everything, whatever strikes my fancy at the moment. And with that said, I'd like Juanita, could you introduce yourself to the people and tell us a little bit about yourself and your quilting history?
Okay. Thank you, Bob. Welcome, everyone. My name is Juan Brister, and Bob and I actually met on Quilt African Fabric Tribe on the Facebook group. So I'm happy he asked me to join you today. But I have not been quilting so long. I actually started sewing as a young girl. And just have a love for fabrics and sewing and stitching. And I just remembered as Bob and I were preparing for this talk, the very first quilt I ever made, and I have no idea where I got this idea from, but it came to me. My daughter was in kindergarten, and she came home and said her teacher was going to have a baby. And so the teacher was going to leave at sort of in the middle of the year. So I went into the classroom and had all of the children draw a picture. And then I transferred that picture to fabric and I sashed it and made a book for her so she would have something to remember children in her
Oh,
class by. And asked me where I came up with it. I had no idea, just something that came to me and I did it. But that was her first quilt I ever did. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to see what happens if I order this pattern. So I ordered a kit that was a log cabin kit,
mm,
and all the fabrics were gingham, red, blue, and yellow. And I sewed that gingham quilt. I didn't necessarily like it much because when you buy a kit, sometimes, although they say all the pieces are cut correctly, they're not always cut correctly. And so
right.
you have to do a lot of switching and pushing around. But so then I actually have done several quilts, and one of the ones I love history and memory. And so at my church in Miami, we needed to do a fundraiser. And again, this quilt pops into my mind, and everybody says, well, we don't know how to sew, Juanita. Who's going to do this? And I said, listen, we're going to do it together. Don't you worry. So we had every group every family in the church talked to us about who they were. Now, I didn't do the majority of the work on that quilt because I had a friend who had an embroidery machine.
Okay.
And she and I actually would go back and forth and choose the digital footprint for what the family members had talked to me about. I wish I had posted that picture because it really was a great project. We had 110 squares and we made close to $8,000 for the church.
Wow.
But it literally tracks the history of the church from 1896, I believe it was, and we actually made that in 2010. So
Wow.
it tracked the history of the church for over 100 years. And so I've done that with organizations that I'm in, where I will actually transfer a picture or transfer the song for the organization or the name of the organization. And I actually have a family quilt that I did that with as well. But I especially love African fabrics, and I actually started when I started with the Quilt African Tribe on Facebook. And that was in 2020, I believe it was,
Hmm.
during COVID. And since then, I have just become enamored with the whole concept of quilting. And so, thank you, Bob, so much for. I've learned a lot. And so, I don't consider myself an expert. I think Bob is an expert, but I don't consider myself an expert. I'm still learning and I'm still growing. So, that's it for me.
Well, thanks, Juanita. And honestly, I don't consider myself an expert either. You know, when people ask me about like this and that technique, I say, I do what I do. I try to improve and learn as I go, but there's no finish line because there's always room for improvement. There's always something new to try. Like you talked about African fabrics. When I started working with Ankara fabrics, and I had some shway shway from South Africa, and I quickly learned if you mix all of that with quilt shop, quilting cottons, which I do, fabrics have different weights to them, and it can be a little
Right.
tricky to kind of get how you're going to fit everything together. But we'll get
Mm-hmm.
into that in a little bit. What we're going to talk about today, and we'll both have little slide presentations that Chen will help us with, is traditional versus modern quilting. Um, and just to introduce the topic, as it were, I went into ChatGPT, which is my new favorite thing to play with, and I just put in traditional versus modern quilting, and this is what it came up with. And this is very, very general because I don't think that you can really put anything in a box per se, any art form. You can't say, this is this and that's like, a rule. But as a very general thing, here's what it came up with, and I agree actually. So traditional quilts, you talk about symmetry. A traditional quilt has high symmetry.
Bob, there's nothing on the screen right now. Should we be looking
No,
at something?
no, right now, no. Chen, if you could not share your screen right now because we're not ready for the slideshow. I was just going to read this and then we were going to go into it.
Okay.
She said give her a minute. So
Okay.
I'll just continue to read while we get ourselves reorganized. A modern quilt has low symmetry generally. It's often asymmetrical or improvisational. In terms of negative space, a traditional quilt will use the negative space merely as a background for the pattern. A modern quilt will use the negative space as a focal point or a design element unto itself. In terms of color palette, a traditional quilt generally is prints, florals, and kind of more of a scrappy look, which I personally love. A modern quilt uses a lot of solids, a lot of bold colors, and generally high contrast. Then in terms of binding, a traditional quilt will generally have a standard matching binding or a striped edge, whereas a modern quilt will use a big stitch or facing or some other more decorative kind of artsy finish to the quilt. I mean, that's just a very, very, very general rule. But what we'll be discussing somewhat also is in terms of guilds. I know Juanita said you don't have a lot of experience with guilds. I have some experience with guilds, but is there a division between modern and traditional quilting? Is it necessary to have that division and say this is modern, this is traditional, or is it divisive? And then do these labels define our style, or do they limit collaboration and connection between guilds? And I will mention that I did belong to a traditional guild at one point. I no longer do because I moved away, but I still belong to the Modern Quilt Guild. And I don't know that there's divisiveness, but I will say that there's definitely opinions. Um, so I think we'll get into that a little bit more, but let's go ahead and show Juanita's quilts. And you could talk about which aspects you feel are traditional, which you feel are more modern. And I noticed on a couple of them, they did seem like a hybrid where you kind of like combine the two aesthetics, as it were. So
Right.
Chen, if you could go ahead and set up Juanita's slideshow, that would be awesome.
Well, yes, Bob, I tend to go both ways. And many times I'm not sure how to even define it myself.
I
Um,
agree.
so I'm with you. I like doing what I do.
And
And
I
I
think
love the creative freedom. And that's what I really think of when I'm thinking more of modern quilting is that creative freedom.
I
You're
would,
free to just sort of do your own with the bright colors, like you
I agree.
said, and leaving space. Uh, but I always have a story to tell. So that is the piece that I like. I am really a storyteller when I'm doing a quilt.
I love that.
And I can actually share that with everyone. No,
No, it's
okay,
not showing yet.
yeah, it's not. But yes, I love telling stories, and so I've used when I told you a minute about the church quilt, where
Mhm.
I have a theme in there. For example, we had a picnic, and someone said, "Well, I don't know what square or how to define my family." So this lady said to me, I said, "Did I hear you say you were going to run a marathon and that you do that all the time?" And she said, "Yes, I run marathons." So my friend and I went on the computer and pulled up a digital print of a runner, and we put a cross in her hand,
Mhm.
and we labeled that "Running for Jesus"
I
with
love that.
Sally. And she literally cried when she saw that quilt. And then we had others where they had members that had served on the altar for years and years, and they had photos of them. So we pushed all those photos of them dressed in their clothing for the altar and said, "Serving at all times or serving through the years." So I like to do that. And for both my grandchildren, I actually made quilts for them at some point where I took pictures of friends and different occasions that they had participated in. And for example, I did photo of their baptism, and I might have taken pieces of the baptismal dress or the baptismal outfit and put that in the quilt as well. Or if they were involved in sports, I would have put that in the quilt, put the so I really like my quilts to be a form of history background. You can look at it and you can tell that story.
And that really
And
makes them a heritage piece because your
yes,
children will have, and they'll be able to relay the story about whatever it was, and then maybe pass it on to somebody else.
right, right. So, but the one quilt, whenever we get that up there, though, is one that I do have on, is a quilt top that my mother actually made.
Wow.
Now, I watched my mother. And so she never said, "I'm making a dress or I'm making anything." It was always just mending.
Mhm.
She's mending pants, mending socks, but would always see her because I was the sewer.
Okay.
So I sew, I make dresses, shirts, etc. And then I watched her and she just have little squares of fabric and she just sew them together with no real rhyme or reason.
Right.
And so I never really talked to her about what she was doing. But when she became ill and we were caring for her, she had this quilt top in the closet. And I remembered the fabrics because they were all fabrics from things that I had made for family members.
Wow.
And so I was so tickled about that. And then I looked at it. And so when we start talking about this modern versus tradition, I asked myself the question, if you looked at it, you might say it's a modern because there's lots of colors and
Hmm.
there's really no specific design, no specific pattern.
Right.
She was doing what the original expectations of quilting
Right.
was where you take old pieces of fabric, you sew them together, and you make something to keep you warm
Right.
or to keep the air out of the house, that
Right.
type of thing. And so that was what she was doing with that. So she passed away, and I learned about a quilting retreat with the G's Bend ladies. And I said to one of my sisters, okay, we're going to the quilting retreat in Mississippi. Now we live in Florida. So she said, well, I don't quilt. I don't even sew. I said, well, you're just going with me because we're going to drive
Right.
and you're going to help me with this quilt and we're going to figure this out. So that was really, I would say, one of my first experiences being involved with a quote quilt community. G's Bend Quilters out of Alabama.
I was fortunate enough to attend the airing of the quilts last year.
Oh, that's beautiful. Wasn't it beautiful?
I'm in East Alabama, so for us it was a little bit over a 3 hour drive, but it was really a cool, cool drive. We drove through the Black Belt, which is where I live, and
Mm-hmm.
Selma, and went through different communities that I had not physically been in but knew about.
Uh-huh.
And then, of course, we got there and took the ferry and went to the thing. It was such a great day. The weather was beautiful, and just meeting people and looking at quilts. And we were with friends. They also had like a little museum kind of exhibit of the
It's
history of
called
the
the
area.
Collective.
So, people
Yes.
who didn't know the history. It was an awesome day.
That they are. So when I look at their quilts, I guess you tell me, I say they're modern, but then I think of the word tradition
Right.
because I think of tradition and history.
I would say that
And really
tradition,
that's how quilts started, was just fabrics being put together with no real specific pattern, except they do tend to have somewhat of a pattern.
right. I would say
Um,
they're traditional in the sense that they learn from their mama and their grandma.
right,
So, and of course, it's traditional because it's being handed down, passed down from generation to generation.
right, right.
They're more modern. I think part of the reason they're more modern is people just didn't have time to sit and make very intricate,
Pattern.
complicated quilts because they had work to do. They were
No.
raising kids. They were just busy.
Yeah, they were busy. And so they didn't take the time. They just took fabric that they had
Right,
around the house.
right,
And of course, now they purchase fabrics and that type of thing. So
right.
they may spend a little bit more time with it. But with my mom's quilt, I took it to the retreat and I actually did a backing for it.
Oh, nice.
And on the back of it, I took my father's two suits that my father had and I cut them up. And then I took pieces of fabric from a dress that I had made for my mom that we buried her in, and I cut that up. And so we sort of used that in the backing
Nice.
and then put it together. And I hand quilted it. And then I had all my sisters help me,
Yeah, we
even
have
though they said they couldn't sew.
we have some family quilts from Troy, Alabama, which is kind of like really out in the country. And
Mm-hmm,
you can tell that some of it was the grandson's pants, because they're little like corduroy pieces from pants. And some of
right.
it was definitely from little girls' dresses. You can tell by looking at
Mm-hmm,
the back. And then it was whatever they had, and they would have the quilting frame pulled up to the ceiling, and they'd work on their
mm-hmm,
farmers, they'd work on their farm, and then at night they would pull down the frame to quilt probably by, kerosene lamp or, I mean, I don't
right.
think they had electricity. I don't think they did. Because I
No,
was
they
in that
didn't.
house before it was demolished. I was in that house and you could look through the floorboards and underneath you saw the dirt under the house.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And they gardened for food, not for, beauty or pleasure. They gardened.
right.
they could eat. So the quilting was done at night, and we would call those utility quilts. And I
Right.
was traditional. I guess I approach things still from somewhat of a traditional quilting, like early training, because I'm self-taught, when I started quilting, there was no internet. So I couldn't go to
Hmm.
YouTube. I got a magazine like you. It said, get this. I got whatever it said to get, 2 yards of blue with stars on it and a yard of yellow, whatever. And I made the thing and I was like, huh. And I really quickly realized I want to do something else. I don't want to just make the thing in the picture, like
Right.
literally, So
Right.
I didn't buy kits. But as I went along, I think I started feeling like I could be freer. I don't have to do the traditional 9 patches. I've done a ton of log cabin quilts, which I love making,
Hmm.
by the way. It's very relaxing.
Yeah.
And 9 patches and bear's claw and all of the traditional things that we sort of see in quilting magazines and books from, I would say, like the 1980s, 1990s. Um, and now I find that I've sort of probably like you, more of a fusion. I do some improv quilts, but I also do
Right.
like a traditional quilt, but I'll use African fabric. So I
Uh,
don't know if that makes it
right.
more modern, or am I just carrying on a tradition with the fabrics that traditionally, where Miriam lives, were used for clothing, not quilting.
Right. Right.
So we've
Right.
taken that and said, oh, these are beautiful. We could just cut this into squares.
We just
And
cut it
put
up.
it up, cut it up, put it on our quilt. I don't care what the pattern is. I don't care if it's a big flower or a tree. It's pretty.
Uh-uh. Nope.
And so in my uneducated days, I didn't have a lot of access to African fabric. So when I did, I would spice them and make stuff. And then I learned little by little about the different types and the patterns and the meanings behind some of the fabrics. So it gave me a little
Right.
more of a respect for it. And I
Yeah.
try to respect the fabric. But I always,
And because when we look at tradition, we talk about in a lot of the readings, when you talk about the traditional quilt, they talk about colors that are a little bit more muted
Mhm,
and a lot of flowers, etc. That type of thing.
mhm. Little calico prints.
Yeah, little calico prints.
Before I,
And so African fabrics are definitely not that.
they're definitely not.
But you can actually use them, you're right, to make a quilt using a traditional pattern and then using those African fabrics, which
What I
makes a
do,
big difference.
there's a famous quilter named Cape Fassett, which people may or may not be
Right.
familiar with him. And I worked with him once, and he told me, because he does a lot of large prints, multicolored large prints fabrics, big florals. And he said the way he approaches his own fabric is he looks at the bolt, and whatever color it reads to him, he'll use it as that color. So if it looks blue, he'll just use it as blue. So when I do the
Mm-hmm.
Ankara fabrics, and I'll pull out a quilting cotton or a bazine or something more solid to go with when I'm making my blocks. And I just
Right.
think like it reads predominantly red, so it's red. It may have 5 other colors in it, but
But you see red.
I see red. Chen, are we ready? I see my name up there. Are we ready to look at slides? Uh, oh, okay. I guess I'll go first.
Okay, you go
Well,
first.
all right. So this one was when Quilt Africa had a Afro-Modern quilt challenge. I kind of misunderstood the challenge. So I made a couple of quilts and I thought, well, what would be modern that I hadn't seen before? And this quilt is super simple and graphic, as you can see, but it only uses bazine, which is if you know me, I'm a maximalist. So for me to make a quilt that was so simple, I mean, I wanted to add in things so badly. And I wanted to add colors and have a different color binding. And then I wanted to start applicating. And I was like, just stop. Because my mind, like, it was a challenge. And I don't use a lot of purple. So I told Miriam, just send me whatever the purple is, just send it me, a couple of yards. And I'll use that as my background. That was my challenge to myself. So I would say this is definitely modern because it's mostly negative space.
Right.
And it's a non-traditional fabric in terms of quilting. which by the way, it's lovely to work with. If people haven't used Bazine, it's
It
very
is.
work with. And it's
It-
nice because it is basically solid. But I also found out, which maybe I knew and forgot or didn't pay attention, was there is a right side and a wrong side. And there's a shiny side and a more
Yes.
matte side. So you can't see it in the picture, but if you really look, you'll see some are next to each other. I'm like, well, I'm not taking it apart. So that makes it more modern, right? Or you could say that might be my humility block because I wasn't paying attention. I like it, it was
I
something
like it.
that popped out of my head. So this one, it's very traditional blocks. This also was a Quilt Africa. I don't know if it was a challenge. It might have been a challenge or a
I don't
block,
remember that one.
what it was, to be honest with you. It was a few years ago. But as you can see, I like maximalism. And I just thought I'll make the traditional blocks, but you may not even get to see the block because
Mm-mm.
it's so busy. And then the border is Shway Shway, which I love. I love working with Shway Shway from South Africa.
I just purchased some when I
And
was there.
it's a solid. It can be a little. It's again, it's a different weight. I found I found it the hard way that I need to pre-wash it, not in the washing machine, but I kind of dunk it in a tub, a galvanized tub with just warm water, and then dry it out and finish with the iron. So I don't like vigorously wash it, but I try to like soften it up a little bit.
Right. Okay.
But this definitely modern because I mean, just look at it. You know, I'm sure the original guild I joined in New York in 1994, they probably would they'd be clutching their pearls if they saw this. All right, Shank, we have the next slide. So this one, uh, my best friend's mom asked me to make a quilt for her best friend. And I adore this woman, but I said to her, I don't really make quilts like for people on demand, kind of, I don't really do that. And she just said, she kept going. She said, well, her favorite color is blue. So I had made the mama quilt just because I wanted to, because I adore her. But I said no. And then I said, well, it's not really that big a deal. It's her best church friend. They go every week. They've been going forever. And I thought, wear blue. But this one is a mix of fabrics from my stash on Tara. And then there's one that has metallic on it. I don't even know how it would be categorized. But to me, this is very modern. I don't think,
Yes.
even though there are traditional blocks in it, it's still
Yes.
very modern. And then, yeah, just the color and the pattern. And again, the maximalism, a different color. I think I use a cheetah print for the binding and piece the back just because I could. And this lady is not in the best health. So she's had a few visits to the hospital and she brought her quilt to the hospital. And I thought, oh my God, I hope nobody steals it. But they all want to know where she bought it. So I said, do not give out my name. Because I just had this vision of like, 20 nurses emailing me and saying, hey, I want a quilt. I'm like, no. So this is very much my thing to just like sit. Those 2.5-inch pieces in the braids are all leftover pieces of bindings from other quilts.
Hmm.
And I save everything. I mean, I really save everything. So I thought I'll just take all these 2.5-inch odds and ends and make braids with it, then trim it, and just it is what it is.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. And
And I bet she loved it.
she did, and I use black and white, as you'll see in this one too. I tend to use black and white as my neutral because I do like all the prints and I do like all the colors, but at some point, your eye needs a place to rest. This was the
Right.
Seasons of Life challenge from Quilt Africa,
Mhm.
and I got really emotional making it. Obviously, it's modern, um, but really, if you look at it, it's constructed of mostly 4 patches, which is a very traditional block. It's just because of the color, it doesn't read that way. And the black and white fabric is actually an Australian Aboriginal fabric. So for
Mm.
me, this was like a cross-cultural um, melding of the worlds of just things I love. And I happen to like that color green, so I use that a lot. But this is something
That
that,
was the seasons of life, right?
yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And this is something if our foremothers saw this, I don't think they would even know. Like, why would you waste good fabric to put something on the wall that you can't even use? My grandmother would have been, she would have been like, "What are you doing? First of all, why are you buying fabric?" But she was very frugal, to say the least. So to her, this would have been alien. Next slide, please. So I would say this is a very traditional block. It's just blue stars. The background, again, is fabrics. I have toile in there. I have Ankara. I have shway shway. I have bazine. I have batiks. So I have things from all over the place. And the only thing that unifies it is the blue star. Um, and it's actually one of my favorite quilts and one of my newest quilts because I got to just cut squares of things I love. But again, it's half square triangles. The whole quilt is half square triangles, basically. So it's traditional, but it's, to me, it would be a hybrid.
Right, right. I think so. The bright colors tend to make it look modern, I would say. But you know, with the blue stars, that's the traditional star.
I would agree.
How large is that, Bob?
It's about 54 by 60. So like a
Okay.
pack size. Um, I
It
remember
might
when
fit on top of a queen size bed.
yeah, it would sit on top and top. And I remember when I
Hmm.
started quilting, people said that yellow is a little bright, isn't it? Like a little judgy, you know? And I was like, well, it is, but I like bright colors. So
I
yeah,
like it.
I like it.
Yes,
It's my quilt.
I like
Uh,
it.
Next, I
Create,
think
it's
this
that creative freedom.
exactly. Next, and um,
Oh, go back to your Christmas
yeah.
tree. I
So
love
this
it.
is just a little Christmas tree I made with Ankara fabric, and I used Moda Grunge for the background, the green color, just because I wanted to show people that are not familiar with African fabrics. Don't overthink it.
Hmm.
Kind of just treat it like it's another fabric. Get over the fact that, like, okay, so when I started quilting, people would say you can't mix cottons and batiks. So of course
Hmm.
I immediately did because I thought, well, why can't I? Because it's just fabric. It's all 100% cotton.
Tell
You know,
me
it's
no,
nothing,
I'm going to do it.
yeah, it's nothing weird. So this was something I want to, it's a little wall hanging. I would say it's probably like 20 by 30. So not terribly hard to make. I just did the crosshatch quilting in the background. I used one of my favorite fabrics for the binding. And yeah, just a simple little Christmas tree with African fabric just to show people. It's just something pretty, nothing to be afraid of. I think that's
My
one.
late sister-in-law saw that pattern. She wanted to do something for Christmas,
Hmm.
and I showed her that. And so she just used red and green. She
Sure,
used traditional Christmas fabrics,
sure.
and she copied that pattern. Just want to let you know. I'll show it to you one day.
Okay, yeah,
But
it's super
she
simple.
actually, yeah, she loved the pattern. Yeah.
Yeah, super simple. All right,
Okay.
now I think it's
Oh,
Juanita's.
great, great. Okay. I love it. All righty.
We're ready for Juanita. There we are. There you are. All right. All yours,
There I
ma'am.
am.
Take it away.
Okay. I actually am one of six girls, and the sister on the far right is the one that went with me to the quilting retreat that said, I can't sew. And then the rest of them all said, oh, we can't sew. And so my sister in law is on the far left, and she and I used to go to quilting retreats together before she passed away. So, anyway, that's my mom's quilt. And I remembered all those fabrics because I made things for my family with those fabrics. And so I never really knew that my mother was putting all that together. I would maybe see her mending or something, but I really didn't pay her that much attention
Hmm,
because I was always on my sewing machine sewing, and she was over there with a needle and thread. So that is the quilt that I took, the quilt top I took to the first quilting retreat.
nice.
And the G Spin lady says, oh, that's a true G Spin quilt right
Yes,
there.
ma'am. It is.
And so they helped me start the hand quilting. And so when I got it back to my sisters, I just said to them, it's not important to me what your stitches look like. I just want you to help me finish this. And
See,
so we did. They were
I
so
think that's
excited
more
about it.
important. Absolutely, that's more important than having
Yes,
perfection because
yes, it
it's
is.
something y'all
It
did
is.
together. Absolutely. Agree 100%.
Right.
It's
In
beautiful.
fact, my daughter said to me one day when I was talking to her about some pottery she was painting, and I said, "Oh, you missed something, or it's not good right there." And she said to me, "Mommy," she said, um, "creation is within the imperfections. The imperfections create the create." And I said, "Yeah, you're right,
Right,
because when it's imperfect, you know it's yours. You
right,
can tell it right away. You can't, because it's yours."
right.
So that was the first one I did with my sisters.
Nice.
Um, so I really like that one.
I
And
do.
I tried to give it to my nephew when he was in the hospital, had a real serious accident. And
Hmm.
he said to me, "No, no, no, Auntie, no, somebody might steal it. So
Right.
please take it back." And I said, "Okay, I'll take it back." Well, that's that one. You can
I
show the
love
next one, Chen. So that's definitely modern, wouldn't you say, but in a traditional sort of way.
absolutely, absolutely.
So right here, she's showing me the back of my quilt, but I'm wondering, Chen, if you can show the front. No, 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 go back. There it is. Okay.
Okay.
So
Wow.
this was my first use of African fabrics when
Mm,
I joined the tribe and Miriam had a challenge.
hmm.
And so she said, "Do whatever you like, just make sure you use all of the African fabrics." She said, "You can choose solid colors if you need to use solid colors." So the only fabrics that are not African in there are the green and the yellow
Okay.
and the black. Everything else is African fabrics that was in the stash that she sent me. That was my first order from
Okay.
her, and I got it, and I don't know, it did not even take me long to think about what I wanted to do. And so when you look at this, church was a real big part of my growing up.
Hmm.
And so that white fabric it was just perfect, I said, for a
Yeah.
church. And I started right in the middle
Okay.
with that church. So I just laid it down. And that one is like a collage, but everything else is pieced. So that was applique, the church, but
Nice.
everything else is pieced. And so I had the church there. And if people can see closely, I have uh, I have people in African dress walking up to the
Oh,
church.
yeah.
And over to the left of the church, I used the salvage from my fabric to create headstones for the cemetery that is next to the church.
Oh, wow.
And so it looks sort of like little thimbles, but those are the salvages from one of the fabrics. And then, of course, the flowers and the trees. And then I had the fabric with stars. So I said the stars in the sky, the blue sky. And then below, if you can see below, this blue is represents the baptismal lake that we were baptized in.
Okay.
We were actually baptized in an actual lake. And
Wow.
so all of this, I used every piece of fabric. And you will see on the back, I used the rest of the fabric. So I used everything.
I love that.
This is called my childhood journey. So on the back, I had enough fabric left to put a backing to the church. And then I took every little piece of fabric I had left
I
and
love
I
it.
just appliqued those pieces onto that black. So that was my first quilt. And I'm definitely a maximalist. I like to use it all. I like to cover the whole thing. Now the back may be a little minimalist, but the front was definitely maximalist. So I used all the fabric I had.
Well, it's
And
really
so I really
reversible
love this
because the
quilt.
back, yeah,
Mhm.
It's really reversible because the back is as beautiful as the front, really.
Yes.
It's
And,
beautiful. It really shows the fabrics and having the church in the center. I mean,
mhm.
it makes the story so much sense.
Yes. And
Beautiful.
so I actually loaned that to my childhood church because I'm back in my childhood home.
Hmm.
And I loaned that to the church and they have it hanging in the church.
Sweet.
So that's where that is now. So that was one. And I actually hand quilted all of that.
Wow.
So this one was the challenge that you talked about, the Afro Modern
Hmm.
challenge. And I refer to it as the circle of life. And unfortunately, when I was making that, I had these thoughts about two people who had traveled with me to quilting retreats and who really meant a lot to me. One is my sister in law, and she passed away.
Mm.
We were supposed to go to the retreat that year, and she didn't make it. And the other was my sister, one of my sisters. And so, if you look at this, I was at my friend's house in Atlanta, and we embroidered a baby right there,
Hmm.
and then a cemetery there. Now, people say, oh, that's kind of sad, but I don't see it as being sad because death is a part of life.
I agree.
And so I refer to it as the circle of life, that we are born and we go in a circle and we may go different paths. We come back and we go different paths in different directions in life, but we end up back at the same place. And so that was what I was doing there. I love working with the bezine,
Hmm.
those colors. I just told Miriam what colors to send me, and she sent them to me. And so, but I'm like you, I sort of needed to put a little bit more in there. So I start putting things on the corners, and I had to tell myself to stop as well, Bob, because I really just wanted to cover the whole thing with some African fabrics.
I love the way you inset pieces into the Bazine because they're simple. They really shine. And it definitely
Mm-hmm.
doesn't need anything else. I mean, even if I didn't know it was called Circle of Life, I think if I just saw this hanging, I would know.
Okay,
It's
all right.
beautiful.
And
No, it's
so I
great.
actually had a long arm person do that for me. I'm not into the long arm myself.
Me either.
And so she looked at it and she said, okay, here are some patterns. And I said, well, it's the circle of life. So you figure it out.
There
And
you
so
go.
she sent me a sample and I said, okay, that's great. So that's what we did there.
I
So
agree.
I
It
love
looks
that one.
great.
And that's definitely the modern, I entered that into the Afro modern design.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes,
It's
yes.
gorgeous. It's gorgeous.
Okay. And the next one, now this one, I think this is modern too. It's busy. Let's just put it that way, but it's definitely modern.
Hmm.
Um, and this was a round robin. And
Okay.
so three of us actually did this. So my piece is the middle. I started the middle 16 by 16-inch block
Hmm.
here. And I was just sitting trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I loved the song by Louis Armstrong, What a Wonderful World.
Aw.
And I was listening, that song came on the radio that night. And when it came on the radio, I said, I got it. And so I sat and I drew a picture. And I was fortunate enough to find the fabrics that I really wanted to add in there. So I pieced and appliqued some of the fabrics. And I see trees of green, red roses too. I see friends saying, I love you, this bright,
Aw.
starry sky, the rainbow. And so I did that middle 16 by 16 inches, put the white around it and the black, and sent it on to the next person. And she actually she went all the way out to the black here.
Hmm.
Quilters, we take things. And so she said she was out walking and her neighbor had thrown away upholstery books. They were on the trash.
Oh
So
no.
she took
Save
up the
them.
upholstery book, brought it in the house. She said, I did check with my neighbor to make sure she could throw it out. And so when I saw this, I thought, oh my God, she embroidered all of this, right? I was so impressed. She
Uh-huh.
said, no, I did not embroider that. I stole it from the upholstery book. So
There's
I also sent her a couple of my pieces of African fabric, which you might be able to see in there.
mm,
She kind of put that in. And then she sent it on to the next person. The next person did a real modern pieces. She did the blocks there. I sent her the fabric with the hearts. I sent her the red, the yellow, and the blue. So she basically said she used all of the fabrics that I sent her. And that was all she wanted to do. So when I got ready to finish it, I had to finish it off. And the little girls, I actually found that panel of little children talking to
mhm.
each other. And so I
Aw.
actually added a panel on each corner. And if you can see on the bottom, I love hands. I work with children a lot.
Hmm.
I love the hands, all the different color hands,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah,
that's
I
my
see it.
backing. That's my backing. But this is truly modern and it is so bright. And I throw it on the bed in one of my bedrooms. And when people come, they'll say, oh my goodness, where did you get that? And I said, oh, I made that. And I kind of like brush it off. And they're still in there looking and I'm walking away. But that is definitely modern, I would say.
It is. What I love about it is my eye goes right to the rainbow in the center. And then
Mm-hmm.
it's like all the colors. I don't know if you guys discussed like what colors y'all would be using because yes, it's bright, but it's extremely cohesive. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing in there that's like a ringer where you would say like, well, why'd she put that in there? You know what I mean? So
Nope, they looked at that
it looks
rainbow
very
like
plain.
you. I think they looked at the rainbow like you, the center,
Hmm. And got
and they
their inspiration
decided they
from
would
that.
just follow that through. So I love it.
It's a very happy quilt, I will say that.
It's a very happy
And yes,
quilt.
it is. Yes, it is modern.
Yes, very modern. And that's what I like to do. So this was my tribute to Martin Luther King Jr.
Mm,
On Black History Month, Martin Luther
mm,
King Week. We always have a gala here in my hometown. So I love African fabrics because just like you said, Bob, we just put those fabrics together. They don't have to match. We have circles, we have stripes, we have all kinds of colors. And I just took all of those fabrics, I threw them on the table, and I said, I have got to do something because they asked me to provide a quilt for auction. I
okay.
said, oh my God, for auction, what am I going to do? And so I threw all those fabrics on the table, and I kind of like orange. So I did a lot of oranges.
Hmm.
And then I pulled pictures from Martin Luther King from the internet. And all of these pictures, they're not proprietary. They said you can use them.
Right,
Somebody asked me that question. I said, I made sure. And
right.
so I pulled those pictures and I ran them on fabric sheets.
Hmm.
And I put that together with some of his favorite quotes. And
Mm,
then I actually see there's no binding on this picture,
right.
but I actually put black on the background. The background had hands, different color hands
Uh,
again, but it was a black background with
mm,
different color hands. And then I actually, again, hand quilted this entire thing. And when I hand quilt, I tend to go in each block.
mhm.
So in each block, I might have been going up this way, over this way,
Mm.
across this way. I just change it up. So that's definitely modern, but
It is, but I will say
it's,
this, if historically, if you look at
yes.
um, quilts from like the 1920, well, even older. But if you
Mm-hmm.
look at some quilts that were made by just, regular everyday women that would talk about like suffragettes or World War I, World War II, it is in that tradition of saying,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, it's a Martin Luther King Jr. quilt. I mean, there's no missing that.
Right,
It's an
right.
honor to him. But that does follow a certain tradition. But again, by introducing the oranges and the African fabrics and the hands, that makes it modern. So again, it's a beautiful hybrid quilt.
Right.
I love the fact that we don't have to be pigeonholed into a box and say it's one or the other.
I do too. I love that. I love that.
Beautiful.
Okay, and think I have one last one.
I think you do too.
Okay, so this one is truly a hybrid because I use the 9 patch, and
Mhm.
the ladies of G's Bend always start when we start the retreats. They show you the traditional 9 patch or the
Mhm.
flying geese. So they'll show people how to do those for people
Right.
who don't know how to do that. And so when I made these, they were like, "Oh, look at Juanita over there making 9 patches." I said, "Listen, I'm not gonna make that many of them because I hate repeating the same thing over and over again. That's
Same.
one reason why I can't do too much of the tradition because I don't like having to repeat a pattern over and over." So I said, "So you'll see a couple of 9 patches, but then I'm going to move on to something else." This is actually a king size quilt. It
Wow.
hangs down on the side of the bed. So
Wow.
it is huge. I thought I will never do this again because it was so huge and so cumbersome just doing the top. And then when you get ready to put the 3 pieces together, it was really cumbersome. But at the quilter retreat, we had beautiful big tables, and
Mhm.
everybody was there to help me stretch it out.
Right.
But I just basically used the colors. I love those bright colors, the aqua and the greens. And then I used a lot of black. And the back of it is actually black. So I call it a hybrid because it's very modern
It
with the
is.
straight lines and the geometry.
It is.
Um, but I did use the 9 patch.
What
So
I love
that's on the
about
bed at my daughter's house in Miami. And
Sweet.
I told her, don't look for another one like that because that was too much work.
Yeah, this was a one-time deal.
But
I did my
Bob,
second.
I don't think we have to, when we talk about divisiveness between modern and traditional, I don't know if it's divisiveness or if it's like you said, it's just opinions.
I think to some degree it might be generational also. I think
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about like quote unquote fine art and paintings, and it seems like there's a movement. And then
Mm-hmm.
somebody says, "Well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to paint flowers. I want to be abstract like Picasso. I want to do my own thing." And then someone says, "Huh, that's interesting." But then they want to do something else. And then you go all the way up to like Andy Warhol, who's painting soup cans. And I don't think that we need to be divisive. I think people have opinions, which is fine. Everybody has opinions, but I personally am like you. I don't feel the need to say I'm a modern quilter, I'm a traditional quilter. I can appreciate everything. I may not want to make a 9 patch quilt anymore because I've done tons of them, but I can appreciate it if I see one. What I love about this quilt, I just want to say is I love that you kept it to a color family because doing that with the aquas and the teals and the green and having the black as the dramatic effect, it's really effective.
Mm-hmm.
It's gorgeous.
Well, thank you. Thank you. My daughter loves it. So then she says, "Okay, so can I bother you to do one more thing?" And I said, "What?" She said, "Well, could you make me some shams? But I
I knew
want
that
them
was
in pillows, but I want them to be all black." I said, "Oh my goodness." I said, "Yes, I will." Um, and so, yeah, I really think I know the gill here, the little small, it's not a gill, but in my hometown, they just opened this little quilt shop.
Mhm.
And when
Oh,
I say small hometown, it's less than 5,000 people, okay? So
yeah.
this lady opened a quilt shop. And so she said, let's do this block of the month.
Mm.
And the name of the quilt is Our Town.
Oh, okay.
So every square, she gives us the colors, the pattern, and everything in a little box. And we do that. So everybody's quilt is going to look alike, right?
Right.
I'm trying hard to try and make mine a little different, but I'm trying to use the fabric that she gave me.
Yeah.
And so we will put that, it'll be 12 blocks. And so when I met with them, I kind of I actually ended up saying to her, "Could we meet with all these people that are participating?" And she said, "Oh, why not?" So we decided we would meet. And I will tell you that the people that I met were very traditional quilters,
Mm,
and they love the whole concept of our quilts looking all the same. It
hmm
was very interesting, the conversation, because that's not who I am.
right.
And so I'm having difficulty really getting it done because I just feel like I'm going to have something that's going to look like everybody else. But we get to choose our own backing, so I'll do a different backing and that type of thing.
And then you
But
could,
I love the camaraderie and the community of
yeah.
quilters.
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, I've participated in things like that where it's like, oh, I'll be a good citizen and do what I'm supposed to do. But when I'm left to my own devices, I'm gonna do what I want. Chen, can you go back to the screen? I want to show something that's sitting behind me, if people can see it. Can you see the red quilt behind me?
Yes.
Okay, so we're almost out of time. Fun story. I had to have surgery. Not fun. But you know how they put you in a little room to get you ready and you put on the hospital gown and then they give you Valium or something to relax you
Mm-hmm.
before they take you in. So I'm sitting in this little room by myself, high as a kite, and I'm like, wow, this hospital gown is so cool. And it had just squares on it. So I took a picture of it and I didn't remember that I took a picture of it. And I got home and I was like, what is this? I'm like, oh, that's my house. So that quilt came from that. The hospital gown was white with just like blue on it, but I used a red background. And then I use all Uncut fabrics for the traditional blocks, but just, put them in so there's a lot of negative space. But I guess my
Mm-hmm.
point of that story is yes, it's modern, but also inspiration can come from flooring, from clothing, from the
Yes.
garden. I mean, from anywhere, really,
From
honestly.
anywhere.
Yeah, from anywhere.
From anywhere. And I think that's the whole thing. But I will go right back to regardless of what we call ourselves or how we define ourselves as quilters, I think the joy of quilting is working within a community of people
I
and
agree.
knowing that there are many, many things that you like that
Mhm.
are the same, but you just express yourself in different ways.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
And it's so
so,
invigorating to see your quilts today, which I did see before because you emailed them to me. But you know what I mean? Before we got together
yeah.
and kind of go like, huh. And then just go like, oh, I really appreciate what she did there. And I love that your specific wheelhouse that you love is historical, telling a story. It doesn't necessarily have to be literal. Like, oh, here's
Mm-hmm.
Louis Armstrong, and I'll write Louis Armstrong because that's what inspired me. But that was your inspiration and how that blossomed into that whole quilt. I think that's awesome. And I love hearing people's stories, their backgrounds, all of it, all of it. I think as
Mm-hmm.
a community, that's what I cherish about being part of the tribe, just sharing all of our information with each other and pictures and just our stories, just being part of a
Yes.
community. So.
Yes. So I think there's worth in everything, modern versus traditional, the hybrid where we put it together and just being able to be very creative and very expressive.
And
Thank you, Bob.
thank you, Anita, so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. It was nice getting together with you. Thank you, everybody, for turning in. Thank you, Chen, for being our tech person, which I'm not capable of being, so I appreciate that. And we will see you all next Wednesday for another episode of the Uncut Thread. All right. Thank you, everybody, and
Hey,
bye-bye.
everybody. Bye.